Greetings, everyone. It's good to see you all, and we definitely appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And happy Pride Month. My name is Kyle Tribble, and I serve as Director of Culture and Engagement here at the school district's DEI office. And I'm very grateful for you to take the time to stop by today, and we welcome you to a Pride panel discussion. This panel discussion is a segment under the Equity in Practice series, and if you're not familiar with the Equity in Practice series, it is a series that looks to highlight conversations around equity, cultural awareness, and social justice. Before we begin, I would like to outline the format for today's panel and also just discuss a little bit of what we hope to achieve in this discussion. So first, the goal of the discussion is to provide school district Philadelphia's educators, staff, and community members with invaluable insights about how to support LGBTQIA plus community members and explore ways to best support and empower LGBTQIA students and our colleagues in and out of the classroom. So that would be our goal for today. So also in terms of format, we have six amazing panelists here today. They're a mixture of SDP educators, staff, and community advocates. So in hopes in addressing as many questions as possible in the allotted time that's provided, we will not have a Q&A session for this particular event. With that, we're asking all attendees to remain on mute during this time. But however, we want to always keep the conversation going and expand the conversation as much as possible. So with that, please feel free to utilize the chat with your thoughts and comments. So I definitely appreciate your understanding. I will also take note, want to make sure everyone takes note that this session is being recorded and will be found on the DEI's YouTube page. I'll be able to provide that for all those who have registered at a later time. Now, I would like to take time to introduce our panelists, and it's fitting to start with our guests to the district and our community partners. So let's start with Dodrick Tugman. Dodrick uses they, them pronouns and is an LGBTQ plus program coordinator at Big Brother, Big Sister, where binary is in the name, but not the programming. At Big Brother, Big Sister, Independence Region, Dodrick partners with GSA programs across Philadelphia and New Jersey with the goal of influencing the production of at-risk youth that have been marginalized for their sexuality and their gender identity and expression. As a member of the BBSI LGBTQ plus program, Dodrick worked closely to close the mentoring gap for LGBTQ plus youth through intentional mentoring that reflects the sexuality, gender expression, racial diversity, and lived experience of queer youth. Thank you so much for joining us, Dodrick. Appreciate you being here. So next we have Dominique Gerard. Dominique uses he, them pronouns. And Dom is the education specialist for professional development at the Mazzoni Center, where he is a part of a team of talented educators who specialize in LGBTQ plus IA plus focused programming and training. In Dom's work, Dom provides training, education for professionals, develop knowledge and skills to best serve LGBTQIA plus patients, clients, colleagues, and community members. Dom approaches the work through practical and intersectional results-focused lens. That was a tongue twister. And he believes everyone deserves access to spaces that honor their identities and validate their experiences. Dom is a graduate of Fordham and Columbia University Teachers College. Dom's educational background is in secondary education, diversity and inclusion training, and leadership development. So for close to 20 years, Dom worked as an educational leader and DEI practitioner in independent schools across Texas, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. He has a diversity and inclusion training in K-12 higher education settings, as well as nonprofit, corporate, and government clients. Dom is a native of Texas, and Dom currently lives in Philadelphia with his husband. They are parents to 2 adult sons and 2 semi-adult cats. Thanks for joining us, Dom. Next, we have Teresa Capesci. I'm sorry, Teresa. You just gave me the pronunciation as well. Capesci. Teresa uses she, her pronouns, has worked as a teacher in the school district of Philadelphia for the last 15 years. For the past 5 years, she has worked with the Office of Professional Learning, and she has served as both a consultant teacher and a school-based academic coach. Teresa is experienced in English language arts, social studies curriculum, mentoring new teachers, instructional coaching, and professional development. Teresa's passion lies in helping and creating inclusive spaces and support for all LGBTQI plus students and staff here at the district. She works as a GSA sponsor for Kappa High School and has helped multiple schools start GSAs in their buildings in conjunction with the DEI office, in multiple offices such as SSR, PASH, and BBS. Teresa serves as a leader and coordinator of the Gender and Sexual Health Summit for over 2 years. Thanks so much for all the work you do here, Teresa, and appreciate you being on the panel today. Next, we have Annie Have to. Annie uses pronouns they and them. Annie serves as a chemistry teacher and a GSA sponsor at Morrell Dobbins CTE High School. Annie has been living in Philadelphia for 10 years and has been teaching in the region since 2019. Prior to teaching, Annie was a biochemical researcher with Drexel University. Annie is passionate about creating spaces, safe spaces, and increased representation for LGBTQIA plus youth in school. Thanks so much for joining us, Annie. Next, we have Dylan. Dylan is a senior equity training specialist in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the School District of Philadelphia. Prior to joining the district, Dylan was a high school educator and was the founder and instructor of the LGBTQ plus elective course. Dylan is deeply passionate about centering diversity, equity, and inclusion in K-12 education. And outside of his work and education, Dylan served as a board member for the Mazzoni Center, an organization working to advance equity for LGBTQ plus youth in the Philadelphia area. Thanks for joining us, Dylan. Finally, last but not least, we have Jenna Kane. Jenna uses she, her pronouns and is a Philadelphia native, finishing up her 14th year in the classroom. While she has taught in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., she's currently teaches queer studies elective and Spanish 1 at Kappa High School. She lives in South Philly with her wife, 2 cats, and dog. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. We definitely we're looking forward to the conversation. So let's jump right in. We have our first question. Some of our first questions are intro questions, but I think they're goodies just for the public. Can you provide insight on what LGBTQIA plus stands for and give a history on the evolution of the LGBTQI plus community?
Great. Thanks so much, Kyle. I'm going to lead us off with that one. So I did a little research. I was curious to see what I could find. For those of you who don't know, we're going to cover every letter, right? So we've got LGBTQIA plus. L is for lesbian, which is actually the oldest term that we've had. It emerged in the 19th century and had been reclaimed around the 1960s. Then G for gay. Gay actually had been a slur for a long time, but was also reclaimed by the gay community in the 1960s. And then B, bisexual. And all three of these had originally been in the acronym before it became more inclusive. So it used to be LGB communities. But around the 1990s to the 2000s, with the acceptance of the transgender community, T was added for transgender. So LGBT. Q is another previous slur that has been sort of reclaimed as queer folk. So kind of an umbrella term. If you're not sure where you fit in, maybe it's flexible. Q is for you. And then we've got I for intersex. So intersex people are a huge part of our community, not always well talked about. So it's great to add that part of the acronym for intersex folks. A, I have heard different things. Sometimes there's 2 A's for both asexual and for allies. Asexual for those who don't experience sexual attraction, allies for those who might not fall into the rainbow categories, but are supportive. And finally, we also have the plus, meaning expansive. I also want to add that sometimes there's a 2S inserted for those who are Indigenous folks who identify as Two-Spirit as well. So that's a little bit of the history of LGBTQIA+.
And then what I'll jump in and add here is a lot of your students, for school-based folks or people in your life, might use different identities that are not in these letters, right? So it's not all-encompassing. You might have students identify with other identities such as, but not limited to, pansexual. And then when we think about different gender identifications, right? Non-binary is not within LGBTQ plus IA, right? So the initials are limiting, of course, in that acronym, right? But just to remember, your youth and people in your life might share identities with you that are not within these letters. And I think we'd be remiss during Pride Month when we think about history of LGBTQ, right? A lot of us last weekend had the opportunity to celebrate Pride. Pride is an exciting event. It's a great time to be around community. Pride also started as a protest, right? So when we think about the history of Pride, June 28th, 1969, right? Police raided a bar in the Greenwich Village, called the Stonewall Inn, right? So just share that with you all to just keep that front and center during this month. And then we'll share a lot throughout the session of like, how do you take action, right? So how do we actualize, right, advocacy and activism within our communities current day to be able to best honor Pride as well?
Thanks, Annie. I appreciate that, Dylan. All good stuff. I'll move on to our next question, which is, what is the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity? Why is this important for the school district community to know?
I'll start us off again with this question. So we're talking about the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity. Sexual orientation is a little bit more external. It's about who you might be attracted to, who you might be in love with, and that can be a spectrum from gay to lesbian to asexual to bisexual to everything in between. And it might change over the course of your life too, as I'm constantly reminding our young people as well. Gender identity is a little bit more internal. It's how you conceptualize your own identity in the framework of gender. A lot of us are very familiar with the binary framework that we've grown up with, male, female. Of course, this is not all encompassing, not only of gender identities, but as biological possibilities as well. So gender identity is about how you fit into that framework. Do you feel more masculine? Do you feel more feminine? And what kind of words feel comfortable to describe yourself?
That's great, Annie. Thank you for that. And I think I would want to stress the idea that Annie mentioned in passing, the idea of the binary, that we're all raised, all of us have been raised with a society that says you've got to be one or the other, male, female, and you've got to identify as a boy or as a girl, as a man, as a woman, and you've got to be attracted to the people on the other track, basically. And that binary thinking is what links a lot of times, that what will link gender identity in the minds of a lot of people with sexual orientation. And so if a child or a young person comes out as trans, a lot of times folks might ask, so does that mean you're gay? And those are two separate issues. And we need to, if we're really going to support LGBTQ youth, we kind of have to unlink these things from each other so that a kid can present themselves however they're going to present themselves. And we as adults have to really kind of untrain our minds out of this binary thinking in order to see sexual orientation and gender identity and assigned sex and gender expression as separate things that don't necessarily align with each other. In order to really support kids, we have to kind of see them as discrete and independent things from each other.
Thanks a lot, Dom. I really appreciate that. I want to open the floor to the panelists as well. If feel free to jump in if you want to add to any question. With that, well, we can move on to our next question, which is, can you speak to why using the correct pronouns for a person is critical and essential for all community members to know?
I can start off with that one. Using the correct pronouns is essential for affirming the identity and respecting a student's dignity. When someone is misgendered, it can lead to feelings of invalidation and a lot of dysphoria. which can have negative impacts on a student's mental health and a person's mental health overall. One of my favorite things about being someone who uses they, them pronouns is like when someone who's really close to me gets the pronoun right, it like warms my heart and it like allows me to feel so seen. Like, and like, I have a coworker who's like, whenever someone, messes up my pronouns, will correct them for me. And like, it's like just other people just allying and just helping me out. And like, it just helps me feel so respected. So yeah, yeah.
I have to use the new love reaction, Dodrick. I love everything that you said. I would add two things. First is for folks, even if you do not identify as LGBTQ, right? Normalizing, introducing yourself with your pronouns is one step I would encourage you to take from this call. So it would look like in a group meeting, if I'm meeting folks for the first time, my name is Dylan Van Dyne, my pronouns are he, him. And then the flip of that is not forcing people to share them, right? And forcing people to out themselves, right? So if you're facilitating the meeting, you might encourage people, if you're comfortable, please share your pronouns. I think past that, to Dodrick's point, I would just add for people within the district, it's a legal requirement to use a student's pronouns that they want to be used, right? We'll talk about policy 252 later, but it's not a choice, right? So if a student says my pronouns are they, them, staff need to use they, them.
Nice, Dodrick, Dylan, thank you so much for that. So let's go to our next question, which is, what are some misconceptions about the LGBTQIA plus identities? And how can the school district community work to dispel them?
I'll start with this one. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions that surround the LGBTQIA community. The one I want to focus on is that I feel like now, especially with how politicized our community is, this idea that it's a new concept, that people who identify as trans or non-binary or queer is something that our kids are, catching through social media or something. So this idea that it is a new concept when in fact, historically, we have records of queer people throughout history. I mean, from like the beginning of text, the beginning of recorded history, queer people have existed. So this idea that we are somehow this new concept and then it's a trend of some sort that our kids are trying to like jump on some identity train when in fact we have recorded history throughout, from the ancient Greeks, from ancient China to indigenous communities here, and what we consider the United States now. I think to remember that is super important. And I think the way that we can continue to dispel that is to infuse this. Not only I'm lucky enough to teach a queer studies elective here at the school I'm at, but it shouldn't just be on the onus of a teacher that teaches a class specifically about this, but to infuse this in curriculum throughout the district so we can continue to dispel the ignorance that this is something new.
Thank you, Jenna. Excellent points. And I'm Teresa, she, her pronouns. The one thing that I kind of wanted to focus on for this question is I think there is sometimes an often confusion around gender identity and kind of gender expression, and thinking that those things are the same when they are not the same, right? So reality is that, gender identity is how I'm feeling on the inside. It's how I recognize myself as a human. So I'm female. That's how I would present myself. Expression, I could be wanting to express myself differently. So, for example, I could be identifying as female, but outwardly, maybe I am dressing more masculine, right? So my expression is different than my actual identity. And I think sometimes and often that's confusing. I've had a lot of different students who are fluid. Some days they come in one way, some days they come in another. And then on those days, they want different pronouns used. And again, so sometimes that often it causes confusion for people. So I think one of the things that we really need to work on is we can't do better unless we know better. So really defining what gender identity is and how it's different from gender expression, and what teachers and school support staff and other kind of need to be aware of especially when we're trying to make sure that we are being inclusive and we're using the right pronouns. We need to know the right questions to ask. And I think part of that is really, in education. So we need to do a better job educating our staff on the differences between those two. And Annie, you started talking about that a little bit with that first question. So I think that would be kind of just an add-on there.
Teresa, if I may, I wanted to follow up on something important you said. You mentioned some students being fluid and it may feel a different way at different times. What is in your opinion, what is the correct way to approach that student and as a teacher or a staff member to have that conversation and to start that conversation? Do you have any tips or thoughts on that?
I think it's, first of all, it's critical to build relationships with our students. So like, and especially at the beginning of the year, I mean, obviously we're at the end of the year right now, but at the beginning of the year, really taking that time to start to build in like solid relationships with students so they feel comfortable enough with you to answer questions. You never want to out a child. So if that's like a question, and again, usually children appreciate that you're asking the question, but that's definitely something that you want to do one-on-one. So like if I notice that a student seems to be fluid and maybe they've told me they're one set of pronouns, but maybe they haven't identified to me that they want me to use other ones. I would probably just pull them off to the side. Hey, can I talk to you real quick at the end of class? Listen, I noticed that you are dressing masculine today, but yesterday you dressed very feminine. Are there different pronouns that you want me to use? And how would you like me to know that each day? So like sometimes a kid will just come in and say, hey, Miss Serenity today, or whatever it happens to be. And they'll tell me, or they would tell me that. But again, that's like a one-on-one conversation you definitely want to have with kids. But like all of that is like that relationship piece is detrimental to that. So like you want to, try to have established relationships so that you can have those open kind of conversations and those open dialogues with students.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Can I add
that.
to that as well?
Yeah.
A really other very easy way that you can do is if you're giving kids a handout, just name, date, pronoun, and then kids can feel the need to always feel if something is different, something has changed. It's a really quick, easy check-in way of saying like, okay, this child wants me to use this pronoun with them today.
And I'm going to add one other thing you just reminded me, Jenna. So you can also have students can add their preferred names into SIS, which is kind of the system that would tell teachers what name they want to have used. And that's not something that all teachers are familiar with, or like the procedures of how to make those changes. So if you are aware of it, or like your secretaries in most buildings will know how to do that, you can always recommend hey, student, if I have a relationship with you, if you want that changed in the system, your parents don't see that, only the teachers and the people in the building will see that. And then kind of just direct them, hey, go to the secretary and they can help you put that into the system so that even if you're not comfortable with another teacher, maybe you're comfortable with me, but not the guy next door. They would also see that in the system, and it kind of just signals to them that they should be using this name or these pronouns.
Great, Jenna, Teresa, thank you for that. So on to our next question, which is, what are the unique challenges faced by LGBTQIA plus youth and our colleagues here at the district? And how can the school district community better support them in navigating these obstacles?
All right, I guess I can go first for that one. It's me and Annie, unless Annie, you want to go first because I was just talking for a while.
I can talk first to give you a break. That's totally fine. I was excited to hear what you had to say, but
I have a whole answer if you want me to go first. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk because I will talk.
In our district, I think we have mirrored a lot of national challenges. And one of them is homelessness and housing instability, because LGBTQ plus youth are reported at way higher housing instability rates than non-LGBTQ plus youth. So I know that there's a lot of organizations in the city to combat that, which is really amazing, like Project Home and obviously other outreach centers. But that is definitely one of the things I have heard come up a lot, is that these youth are coming out, living their best lives, their truest lives, and maybe then find themselves without a place to stay. So that is definitely something that's happening in our district as well as national. But in terms of other just day-to-day struggles for both LGBTQ plus youth and coworkers, I would say one of the biggest challenges is just the idea of knowledge, inclusive knowledge. Like what Teresa was saying, the way that you introduce your pronouns, how that's brought up in meetings, the culture of a school, it can all be very intimidating if you're gender or sexually diverse. So I think one of the best things people who can do that are allies is, like Teresa said, introduce themselves with their pronouns, add it to your email signature, normalize the idea that we all have to share our gender identity. I think that's a huge way to kind of address one of those challenges that we face here.
All right, so I have kind of two buckets of answers. So I'll just kind of start with the youth answer first, and then I'll kind of talk about colleagues kind of from my perspective. So when we're talking about our youth, there's a lot of different obstacles they face. So like obviously like bullying and harassment is still clearly an issue in a lot of buildings. They're actually more likely to be bullied and harassed than probably most other groups in buildings. So that's something that's still very real for our students. In addition to like a lack of support. So one of our goals as a community, and all, I think the whole gang's in this room right now, but like there's a lot of people who are actively working to make sure that students have supports in buildings. But there are a lack of supports. So like things like GSAs, they're not in every building in the city. So, or maybe they are, and maybe they're not functioning. Maybe there aren't staff members in buildings who are comfortable being supportive people for students. So there's a general kind of lack of support. And that can also be happening at home. So like if they have a lack of support at home and they also have a lack of support at school, like feelings like Annie said about depression and anxiety and things like that, that's compounded and kind of multiplied. So that lack of support is definitely one of the bigger issues. And visibility. So I would say like invisibility. So we don't see a lot of queer story. I'm just going to use the word queer for all intents and purposes. So we don't see the like queer stories in curriculum. I'm not seeing that in my history books. So in June, am I hearing about Stonewall in my classroom, in my history classroom, in my English classroom? Are my English teachers reading books? And this goes all the way down to kindergarten. So like, and we have a list of library books that we can be teaching at each grade level and kind of like each chunk. So how are we putting those inclusive, even like literature in front of kids? Do we have like posters up or things that are kind of affirming for different identities in our classrooms? Those types of things make students feel visible, but they also make them feel invisible when they're not present. So I think that's something that we can, and they're easy fixes, right? So those are things that can easily be adjusted and are a little bit quicker than some other things. And then Annie, you started to say this, but the like kind of gender identity issues. So students who are kind of gender non-conforming face issues like restrooms, right? We have policy 252. We should have gender neutral bathrooms in every building. They shouldn't be hidden in the basements. I shouldn't have to go 4 floors to use a restroom. And then I have schools, and this is something I heard kind of clear across the board during our conference. But a lot of people don't even have them in their schools. And the reason being is they say, oh, well, students will vape in the bathroom or students are doing this in the bathroom. Like they're seen as a threat and they're made inaccessible. So for a student who is transgendered or gender non-conforming, that would be like an additional challenge, right? So those are challenges, right? I just said a lot of words. As far as adults, adults look a little bit different. And adults actually have much less support in this district than the kids do. Which is surprising. And again, something that we're seeking to change. So things like microaggressions. So we see microaggressions happen with race, but you also see them in reference to gender identity and sexual orientation, right? And they're sometimes subtle, sometimes they're direct, but there are things that are definitely happening with adults in schools. Feeling closeted. When I was a young little baby teacher, I was closeted. I was not the resident gay teacher in the building, not when I was 21. That's something that I grew into. But again, so like feeling that you have to be closeted, that you can't show your true person or like who you actually are to students, in fear of like, you might also be bullied. And I've seen this with new teachers, especially because I work with new teachers, like being harassed or bullied by students, names being said to them, like the things that are happening to children also happen to adult teachers in buildings. I'm just going to use teachers because that's kind of my largest frame of reference. And then kind of just like our school culture is very heteronormative, right? So like, and somebody said this earlier about, Dom, I think you said it, like we're raised like, all right, I'm a girl, I date a boy, and I'm a boy, I date a girl. But the culture of schools is generally heteronormative. So it just, that assuming that everybody is heterosexual also is isolating and invalidating. And that is also both for adults and also for children. I don't want to be negative. So how can we help? There's lots of things you can do to help. And again, no better, do better, right? So professional development, like Tune Up Tuesdays has professional development. Dom's one of the presenters. Nick also has things like the equity sessions and teaching for socially just classrooms. But those things need to be happening wide scale in school buildings, right? I can opt into Tune Up Tuesdays, but like what's happening at the school level regularly? But like, so professional development is definitely needed and something that can help people like address these kind of issues that are happening in schools for teachers and for students. Curriculum's the easiest. There are thousands of books. There's different ways to bring little things into a classroom to make kids feel seen. So that's not just stories about queer people, that's stories about Black people and Hispanic people and Asian people and all people. So inclusion includes everybody. So like, I think curriculum for me has always been the easiest way to start to bring it in and make it a part of the conversation. Making sure 252 is followed and actually having accessible gender neutral bathrooms, or CAPA, original CAPA, I'm pretty sure you're gender neutral. The entire school was gender neutral bathrooms, right? Yeah. I would love to see that in every high school across the city, but like just making sure that they're accessible will be step number one. Making sure like anti-bullying policies, SSR has forms and things, but like how are we following up and ensuring that those things are happening in schools? Pronoun visibility, Annie, you said that already, and celebrating things, right? Pride is in June, but there's also things you can do every single month to celebrate different pieces of pride. And a lot of those things can be led by GSAs, which we'll get to in a little while. So that was a very long answer.
No,
Sorry,
we
that was long.
appreciate it. No, we appreciate it. We definitely appreciate it. We already kind of touched on some of the practical things folks can do, but let's dive in just a little bit deeper. And my next question is, what strategies can educators implement to create safe or brave spaces and inclusive spaces for LGBTQI plus students, particularly in areas where acceptance may be limited? So I'll go to Dodre. What, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. I think there are several ways that faculty members can create safe and inclusive spaces for LGBTQ plus students, even in areas where acceptance might be limited. I think the first thing is that faculty members should continue to educate themselves and their students on queer identities and issues, and learn why it is important to use the correct pronouns and how impactful it can be. I think incorporating like queer literature, history, and other perspectives into curriculum is amazing and can do so much to help a student feel seen. One of the teachers at one of the schools I work with taught a book where there was a Black Latinx queer lead. And just walking into that school and into that classroom and seeing this book made me so happy to think of the students who are going to like be impacted by the stories and by seeing themselves. I think seeing yourself in school and seeing your experiences in school is extremely impactful. And I was just overjoyed to see that teacher doing their part. I run GSA programming, so GSA programs every month. Like we have a lot of affinity months for Women's History Month, for Black History Month. I would include things about Black queer people, things about queer women, just to highlight the people who have been impactful in our community. If your school doesn't have a GSA program, try to work to establish a GSA program that supports LGBTQ plus youth. And like if your principal is apprehensive, like see what strategies you can use to kind of push for these resources and trainings for staff. Sometimes the school climate is just not affirming at all. And I'm not saying that you should make yourself like the poster person for queerness or just like allyship, but make yourself and your classroom an affirming space by putting up signs, pride flags, just show your students that they are safe with you. So if there are 50 classrooms in the whole school, they know that there's one person in this school that will show up for me and here to defend me. Two teachers at a program that I work with, they walk around with these like pride lanyards with their pronouns on them. And I know, like, I've seen students interact with these teachers. I know that the students feel safe with these teachers, and just seeing that, like, that sign of inclusion is just everything and so impactful for these students. And it's like these two teachers now serve as like a queer safe haven for these kids, right? And for other adults in the school who might not either even be super visible or out, they can see that there's someone here supporting them. And one thing I really want people to know is to be an ally. I was on a call yesterday and someone was sharing a story about how they show up as an ally. And I think sometimes we can broaden our impact as allies. Like, it means so much more to a student than you think, by just simply using the right pronouns and just standing up for their rights in schools by calling them their preferred name. It's extremely impactful, and I think these are just very like small ways you can be affirming for youth in your schools.
Thank you, Dodrick. I appreciate that. And you mentioned GSAs. I think GSAs have come up quite a bit in this conversation. But let's go to the next question where we kind of address it. So what role can LGBTQIA plus student organizations such as GSAs and alliances play in promoting inclusivity, safety, and advocacy within schools? I will start out with Jenna.
So I have run GSAs in the past, and I think they're incredible spaces to provide community for our students who need to see themselves reflected amongst other school members and other community members at school. So I think it's really important that we have GSAs that are functioning and flourishing, visible within the community. I am apprehensive with this question specifically, and how it's, how is it GSA's role to promote inclusivity and safety and advocacy? And yes, I think having them are super important, but I'm hesitant to have, say, like an admin say, okay, well, I have a GSA at school. Let's check that box off. Like, look how inclusive we are, or look how safe our students feel. And I think it's not up to the onus of students that are in the GSA to be the ones to be promoting safety and inclusivity. That is absolutely a systemic issue that we need to provide safer schools so kids who happen to be in GSA do feel seen, and they do feel supported, and they do feel safe. So while I think GSAs are an important, incredible first step, I think it's not up to the onus of the GSAs to be the ones to be promoting the inclusivity per se.
Nice, appreciate that, Jenna. Let's go to Teresa. Teresa, you do a lot of work with GSAs, and I want to add to this question if I could. Could you just give us, like, for those who aren't familiar, what is a GSA? How does it function? Can you just tell us a little more about that as well?
Absolutely. So Gender and Sexuality Alliances is the letters. That's what they stand for. And there's lots of people in this room who work with GSA. So like Dodrick is amazing, and BBBS can come to your schools and help with your programs. I want to throw that out there. Shameless plug. Also, so I think there are three kind of buckets, and I'm going to talk about, Jenna, I'm going to come back to what you said because I think it's important. I think that GSAs really do kind of provide a safe space for students. So a lot of the times what we'll see with GSAs, and this kind of addresses your question, Kyle, is they function as a social space, right? So a lot of different, you can choose what kind of GSA you have, but a lot of the times it's just simply a social space, a space where students can connect with their peers, where they can share similar experiences. They help to kind of reduce that feeling of kind of isolation, and it kind of just fosters a sense of belonging and community. So like that's kind of what a spatial or kind of like a social space might look like. Sometimes that also includes like mentorships, and that could be like within a school. So maybe there's an upperclassman paired with a freshman, or it can have like, organizational mentorships, whereas like big brothers, big sisters, they come in and they also serve as mentors. So it can be like just that safe space aspect. That would be like one area. Additionally, though, it can function very much like a student government, and be kind of more of an advocacy type of group. And Jenna, I know you said that. I'm going to come back to that because I want to talk about it. I think it's important. So if I'm functioning like a student government, there's kind of like a structure to that. So I'd have like, you know, a president and different roles within that group. And then on that particular group, maybe they're meeting with the equity team and they have like, hey, equity team in my building, and every building has an equity team. These are the things that I notice is happening in school from my student perspective, and schools want to hear student voice, and an equity team would be a great place to like start that conversation. And it would be a safe space for students also. So I noticed that we don't have a gender neutral bathroom. I noticed that my teachers aren't using the pronouns. This is something that if my group is functioning more as like an advocacy piece, that's maybe the conversation that I'm having in school with like an administrator or a group of teachers. No, it is not the children's job to do all the things that the school should be doing themselves. But when students are comfortable and when students, if they want to seek social change in their buildings, I think that we should definitely be encouraging that and like giving them the roots for how to do that effectively. So it can function that way as well. And yes, Jenna, I do think sometimes that when we have GSAs in buildings, the box just kind of gets checked off like, hey, we're inclusive. We have this thing for our kids. But where there's other things not happening and systemically there are not correct supports in the building, sometimes it makes it seem like there are when we have a GSA, and that's not totally accurate all the time. So I might have a GSA at the building that I'm working at now, but when I go out in the hallway, I'm hearing derogatory gay slurs every single day, right? So there's like that one doesn't cancel out the other. So I would say that like social space and a place for like to teach them maybe how to enact social change is definitely something that you can be doing, but that's something that kids decide. You're just there, like you're the backup dancer. Like the kids should be kind of running and deciding what they want to be doing in the GSAs and like what they're comfortable doing. Like my kids at KCAP, like we had a drag show, they performed, we did a whole thing, right? They did presentations during community meeting times. But again, the kids were comfortable doing that. That was my door, sorry. But that's something that they led. That wasn't something that I asked them to do. So like, know your kids. That's what I said, build relationships, but let them kind of be the leaders of change and like what they want to be doing in their buildings and in their schools.
Thank you. Thank you. Definitely appreciate those great answers and advice and tips. I wanted to write this next question to Dom, if I can. So Dom, what are some of the best practices for addressing the unique mental health needs of some LGBTQIA plus youth, including access to student services, access to support services, pardon me?
So, you know, I don't know the internal workings of the school district as well as some of you all do, but I would say sort of general recommendations that we at Mazzoni make in terms of mental health services writ large to any school that we talk to. The first is training, that your counselors and your support staff need to be adequately trained with regards to LGBTQ identities in order to appropriately serve them and see them as whole human beings. And to not do the damaging things that they are, in fact, you know, that their mental health is suffering because of, right? So if we are compounding that as, you know, mental health professionals because we don't know what we don't know, then that's on us, right, to do that work, our own work, in order to be able to support students appropriately. I think the thing, like, you know, once you get your training, I think the thing to think about first off is that this is equity work. Like this isn't about treating every kid, you know, the same. This is about recognizing that inherently these kids are suffering and are also hiding so many things about who they are, that they, you know, some of them may be quite out and proud, and that's great. But some of them may be suffering, and it may be compounded because they are hiding. I think a lot of times today, because, you know, there is greater visibility, though, you know, all the points made about curriculum and do we see ourselves in books and literature, et cetera, is all true. But there is greater visibility. And so we think that the visibly queer kids are the kids that we're worried about, but there are still kids who, you know, absolutely cannot be out with who they are, and they're suffering in silence. So that equity work is about reaching out and doing that, you know, introducing yourself with your pronouns consistently, not just when you have a kid who shows up who kind of seems queer, you know, but doing that consistently so that every kid knows that you're open and supportive to their identity, even if they haven't come out yet. And then finally, I think looking at all the work that we do with regards to mental health services through a trauma-informed lens, that is going to be, has to be sort of the first order of business. You shouldn't assume, we shouldn't assume with any kid, but you shouldn't assume that every queer or trans kid has experienced trauma. They may come from a home that is supportive. Their religious grandma may be really down for supporting their identity and their journey. So you shouldn't just assume because a kid comes from a certain background or a certain neighborhood that they don't have support at home. But you can, pretty much assume that if they are in some way queer or trans, that binary thinking that I talked about earlier, that kids are policing them, and the way that they police them is through bullying, is through discrimination, is through intimidation to get them back on track, right? So I think, approaching things with the trauma-informed lens from the get-go is important because all kids have experienced trauma in some way, shape, or form, but that, recognizing that LGBTQ kids are bringing with them a great deal of baggage when they come in for mental health services is one of those ways that you can be more equitable in terms of serving them.
I appreciate that, Dom. Dodger, do you have any thoughts on this question?
I think Dom answered that question amazingly. One thing I would just add is find resources and know who to refer folks to. I think at the end of the day, a lot of people are teachers and not mental health providers, and students can come to you looking for support, but find have a few places. I have 4 organizations in my back pocket that if I know I can't deal with something, I refer a student out, especially surrounding mental health needs. So I think just having those resources available and knowing that if something is not in your capacity, you can refer it out and know that a student will have access and feel safe, and also follow up with them to make sure they're going to the places you refer them to. But yeah, but Dom, wonderful response.
Great. I totally agree. Let's move on to the next question, which is how can schools effectively address and prevent bullying and harassment based on sexual orientation and/or gender identity within the district and Philadelphia at large? I'm sure I think we have some community members here. So I'll start with Dylan. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll start with the individual level for staff at schools, and then I'll talk about policy. I think for staff and buildings, some of this has already been named, right? So the first thing we'll ask of adults is please don't let homophobic, transphobic slurs slide for any reason, under any circumstance, right? You all might recall in your own life when you were a kid in school and you saw an adult not say something when something happened, right? What's the message that sends to you? And I'll share a positive example. I was with a school yesterday and a teacher shared out her daughter actually had challenged her peers the other day when they said that's so gay in school. And it was like a proud mom moment, right? But what I said to the teacher was, it's because she's learning from you, right? And our kids are always watching. For the teachers on the call, that sometimes so much so where it's like, well, let me have some personal space, right? They're always looking at us and seeing what we do and what we do not do, what we say and what we do not say, right? So please interrupt it when you hear it. Modeling use of pronouns. I talked about this earlier, but as a teacher, right, on the first day of school, coming back in August, right? My name is Mr. Van Dyne. My pronouns are he, him. And I think to Jenna's point earlier, right, throughout the school year, asking students, right, for name and pronouns, I would say particularly important in August, the 3 questions I encourage people to ask: what name would you like for me to use? What pronouns would you like for me to use? What name and pronouns would you like for me to use when I call home? The third is really important, right, as to not be assumptive about what name and pronouns we should be using when talking to families. And then just day to day, right, inclusive language as adults in the building, whether you're instructional or not, right, instead of boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, there's so many alternatives. Folks on the call, I'm sure you have many ideas, right? Everyone, y'all, if y'all feels like I'm not Southern, I don't want to use y'all, right? Students, room 109, right? Friends, there's so many things we can do without saying boys and girls. I will say from a policy thing, what's good for folks to know, policy 252 explicitly protects trans and non-binary students, right? So the 5 key things: staff have to use chosen name and pronouns. Students have the right to keep their gender identity private, a la if they don't want to share with home, staff may not share with home under any circumstance, right? They're not allowed to because the student has that right. The third is that students get to use their restroom and locker rooms in accordance with their gender identity. The fourth is the dress code has to be gender neutral. And the fifth is that schools should not have gender segregated activities that do not have a pedagogical purpose, right? So something like a boy line, girl line can't happen. I love that, Tim. And then I'll say if there's harassment and bullying happening, policy 248 protects students. Anyone can file a hipster. It does not need to be an adult, right? Empower our youth to advocate for themselves. If they have an adult in the building that is discriminating against them, they are protected under policy 248. Adults, the last thing I'll say, policy 348. For the adults on the call, we talk a lot about youth, right? You are protected as staff in this district against discrimination as well, right? So if you are an LGBTQ identifying adult and you experience that, policy 348 protects you as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Dylan. And you mentioned policy 252. So let's dive in just a little bit more and just like how that works on an everyday basis, if we can. So I'm gonna start with you, Dylan. What is policy 252? You gave a nice breakdown. So I'm not sure we had to go over that, but how can students and staff ensure that these ideals are upheld every day in school communities? So how does it look in practice?
Yeah, I think the classroom routines and the classroom culture piece at the beginning of the school year is really important, right? So that's when systems are built, right? So when you start the school year, please do not start the school year with a boy line, girl line, right? Not only are you legally not allowed to do that, right? But there are so many alternatives. So as you go towards your summer and you think about next year, like what are the ways that I want to do it? I was just at a school the other day and it was Sixers and Flyers. And you might be like, well, I'm not a Philly sports fan. That's fine. Tiffany, I see your Phillies background. Right. There's so many other ways for you to do this. So let's get creative. Let's think about how do we want to create those systems. That goes for boy lunch, girl lunch. We can't have that either, right? Boy recess, girl recess. So even for school leaders, like what are the other ways that I want to set up systems to be inclusive? I think is really important. And then I think the other piece is like throughout the year, right? When we think about like day-to-day actions that we're taking, what are the things that we're doing in our classroom and in our hallways, right? To be in accordance with this. Right. So it might be something like written language home. If we're sending a letter home, the letter shouldn't be written with he, she everywhere. Right. We can use gender neutral language. We have to use gender neutral language. Right. But it's just an easy control F in some of our communication to our families. So I think just using that lens past like system level, but day-to-day action level to make sure that we're upholding that throughout the year too is important.
Appreciate that, Dylan. Jenna, do you have any thoughts on that particular question?
I think Dylan did a really good job answering specifics around like what is policy 252 and as well as like day-to-day things that we as teachers can be doing. One thing I did want to add is I think sometimes staff members get so anxious that they're going to mess up. And if you misgender a student and or do something they're not supposed to as per 252, it's like I think sometimes I have conversations with coworkers around, well, like, how can we do better? It's like sometimes people who make mistakes in these realms sometimes get really clam up and then defend themselves or, you know, sometimes go on the offensive. And I think it's a way that it's a conversation that we can also do is like, it's okay to make mistakes. And it's like, how do you address those mistakes? If you do misgender a child or you do use the wrong pronouns, it's like, well, don't make it about yourself, right? Like apologize, keep it moving, and then make sure that you are doing something to remind yourself next time that you're not continuing to do it. Because I think a lot of our students give us, I think sometimes even more grace than we should have. And, but it's also at the same time, like, it's really important for us to, as teachers and staff members, to really want to do better and to want to honor the identities of our students. So even something as simple as like, I have a seating chart and I color code the seating chart for myself. And it helps me know that, okay, this student uses he, they pronouns, and I might like circle their name in a specific color at the beginning of the year. So just like little tiny things do make a big difference. And I think it also is important for our kids to know that we are trying and always wanting to continue to do better for them.
Nice. I appreciate that, Jenna. The small things definitely matter. We have one more our final question. I know we're winding down on time, but I think this is a great question for our community partners. So I'll start with Dom. Are there community resources and/or programs for supporting LGBTQI plus youth, and also educate the Philadelphia community on LGBTQIA plus affairs?
Sure, our Mazzoni Center is a great one. We do have a very robust education department that provides professional development for adults. We provide education for young people with that. Actually, that part of our department is expanding. So sexual health education for kids as young as, I believe, second grade, third grade, all the way up through high school. So that's definitely something to reach out for, but it's something that your school has to arrange independently. It's not a school district-wide thing because it's grant funded. There's that. There's professional development from me and from my colleagues. We also have professional development with regards to interpersonal violence, which is specific to the Philadelphia area. I posted a couple of links to our resource guides that are updated yearly that will give you a lot of different resources and programs, but the Attic is a great youth program. Mazzoni has individual youth meetings at our center, but also virtually. So those are a lot of different ways of connecting kids with programs and with support. I think particularly for trans youth, we have to be aware that trans youth, particularly those who are seeking gender affirming care, have a lot to navigate. Pennsylvania doesn't make it any easier for kids who are seeking gender affirming care. So not that you are going to be recommending a doctor to them or anything like that, but just be aware that those kids who are looking for gender affirming care may endure additional challenges because like I said, Pennsylvania does not make it any easier for a kid to get that care that they need. But there's a lot of support out there. Mazzoni and CHOP in particular have very robust gender affirming care programs for youth. So that's what I would say.
Appreciate that, Dom. So I guess we can finish up with Dodrick. Do you have any thoughts? I know you mentioned having a few in your back pocket, so.
Yes, I do. A shameless plug for us at Big Brothers Big Sister. We partner with GSA programs, and a part of our partnership is that we try to provide as much resources as possible for our faculty members. We work closely with the Attic Youth Center and the Bryson Institute. I know this isn't for Philadelphia, but we brought someone from the Bryson Institute, which is a program within the Attic Youth Center that provides educational trainings for best practices for working with LGBTQ plus individuals to one of our programs in New Jersey to talk to some of our students, right? Some other organizations. So if you partner with us at Big Brother Big Sister, you can get resources like that. Some other organizations that you can work closely with is Mazzoni. You can work with Galay and the William Way Center. I love Galay. They've become our best friends at Big Brothers Big Sister because they provide advocacy and educational programming for a lot of LGBTQ plus students. They have a part of their organization where they are able to provide housing for students who are unhoused, and they do fun things like game nights and stuff like that for students. Again, love the Attic. They have a lot of counseling services. They provide support groups, and they do workshops as well. So those are some organizations that you can partner with. If you put your email in the chat or something, or I can put my email in the chat, and we have a resource list here at Big Brothers Big Sister that we can send out to you, like just to help. But yeah, I'm gonna put my email, and those are some organizations that are fun to partner with and are always available. But yeah, I'm gonna put my email in the
Dodrick,
Nice.
I just put in the chat, I just put a doc for anybody who wants more information. So if you want to leave your names, emails, and then what you need. So if it's like resources from Dodrick, GSA supports, how to start a GSA, just kindly put your information in that document, and then we can try to get it to the right people for you to get you supported and that kind of thing.
Nice. Appreciate that, Teresa. Yeah, this is, we'll be wrapping up. I want to just thank the panelists and thank you all for your amazing expertise and just taking the time to share all these amazing advice and tips with the school district community and the Philadelphia community at large. Also want to thank everyone for joining. I know this is a lunch hour for many, so we really appreciate you taking the time to hop on and enjoy. I know there is a lot of educators aren't able to make it during this time. We will be posting this on the DEI School District YouTube page. I'll be sure to follow up with you all with that video. If you registered, I'll be sure to send it out by Friday, and hopefully you can share it with a colleague or a friend. But that's all for now, and thank you all for joining. Have a good one.